The knock came before sunrise. Not a neighbor, not a package. A marine courier. She opened the door still wearing her robe, hair unbrushed, coffee cooling on the counter behind her. He said her name softly, the way they teach them at Arlington, slow, careful, as if each syllable could break something fragile. He held a folder, not a flag, and before he spoke she already knew. That was the day Emily Carter's life, folded tighter than the flag that would soon rest on her mantle. 10 years, 10 long, disciplined years since that morning, and still, sometimes she swore she could hear the soft thud of his boots leaving her porch, the sound that ended the first half of her life. People had told her grief came in waves, but they were wrong. It came in orders. Quiet, structured, repetitive. You stood straight, you saluted, you survived. She learned to iron grief the way Daniel once ironed his uniforms, crisp, precise, without emotion. At ceremonies, she learned to say the words people expected. Thank you for your service. At home, she whispered to no one, who thanks the ones left behind. Her sisters stopped calling after the funeral. Her mother visited once, brought casseroles, advice, and silence, then never again. The town, Jacksonville, North Carolina, went back to its business of saluting uniforms and forgetting widows. She lived alone near the Marine base, a town where jets screamed by day and silence filled every night. She took a job at the commissary, stacked cans, smiled at strangers, drove home to the same house she and Daniel had once painted yellow. It wasn't sadness anymore. It was muscle memory, discipline in place of dreams. Until that one morning when the phone rang. It was an ordinary sound, but it cracked her world like thunder. Mrs. Carter. A woman's voice, formal, careful, rehearsed. This is Child Protective Services. I'm calling about a dependent listed under your late husband's name. Emily froze. A dependent, 10 years after Daniel's death. My husband's been gone for a decade, she said slowly, every word tasting wrong. Yes, ma'am, the voice replied. We're aware. The child's mother recently passed away. We're attempting to locate next of kin. The clock on the wall ticked once, twice. Her hand went cold around the phone. You must have the wrong Carter, she said. My husband was Staff Sergeant Daniel Carter, United States Marine Corps. That's the name we have, ma'am. The birth certificate lists him as father. The boy's name is Evan. He's 8 years old. 8. The number hit her harder than the call that morning 10 years ago. 8 meant the child had been born 2 years before Daniel died, which meant. Her throat closed, her knees nearly buckled. She whispered, that can't be right. But the paperwork didn't lie. The caseworker's tone softened. The boy's mother, M. Ruiz, passed from breast cancer 2 weeks ago. We're looking for family before foster placement. Foster placement. The words landed like a command she couldn't ignore. Emily imagined a boy she had never met, Daniel's eyes, perhaps his chin, sitting in a waiting room while strangers decided his fate. The thought made her chest ache. She heard Daniel's voice in memory, the voice that steadied her through every deployment. If someone needs help, you show up. She whispered into the quiet kitchen, if he's yours, then he's mine too. The next morning she ironed her blouse with the same precision she once used for his uniforms. Her reflection in the mirror looked composed, but inside, every part of her trembled. At the county building, the caseworker, young, polite, already exhausted, met her in the lobby. Mrs. Carter, thank you for coming. I know this is unusual. Unusual, the word didn't come close. The waiting area smelled like crayons and disinfectant. In the corner sat a boy clutching a backpack almost bigger than he was. Dark curls, thin wrists, eyes too serious for 8. Evan, the caseworker said gently, this is Mrs. Carter. He looked up, wary, curious, too quiet. Emily forced a smile. Hi, Evan. He nodded, didn't smile back, just studied her the way a soldier studies uncertain ground. They sat at a low table, forms, signatures, words that blurred together. All Emily saw were his hands twisting the strap of his backpack, small and tight. "Do you know who I am?" she asked quietly. "They said you're my dad's wife," he murmured. "Your dad was Daniel Carter," she said, her voice catching. "He was a Marine." Evan nodded. "Mom showed me a picture once. He was in uniform." "Did she talk about him?" "Not much. She said he was brave." The room went still. The caseworker pretended not to listen. "Do you have any other family?" Emily asked. He shook his head. "Just me." Then it happened, a moment that split her world in two. He looked at her, eyes glassy but dry, and whispered, "They said I might go live with strangers." He hesitated. "Are you a stranger?" The question tore through every layer of distance she'd built. For 10 years she'd been nobody's anything. Not a wife, not a mother, not a name anyone said out loud. And now this child, Daniel's child, was asking her if she was a stranger. "No, Evan," she said, her voice steady for the first time that day. "I'm not a stranger." He blinked. "Then who are you?" She swallowed. "I'm the person who's going to take you home." The caseworker's pen paused mid-note. "So you're agreeing to placement?" Emily nodded. "For now," she said softly. "We'll see where it goes." Outside, the wind carried salt from the Carolina coast. The boy tugged at his jacket sleeve, glancing up at her, cautious, curious, waiting for her to change her mind. "Mrs. Carter," he asked quietly, "do you have any rules?" She smiled just a little. "Plenty, you'll learn them." They walked to the car in silence. For the first time in 10 years, there was another heartbeat in the vehicle. On the passenger seat, a folder thick with signatures and legalese. In the back, a boy hugging his backpack like armor. The air between them felt like the space between storms, quiet but charged. She tried small talk. "Are you hungry?" He shook his head. "Do you like pizza?" A shrug. She stopped anyway, ordered 2 slices extra cheese. He ate a few fries, then pushed the rest around his plate. Polite, too polite. That quiet politeness broke her heart more than rudeness ever could. When they reached home, he stood at the threshold, scanning the hallway like he was checking exits. "This is your room," she said, showing him the guest room, fresh sheets, folded blanket, and on the dresser, a framed photo of Daniel in uniform. Evan froze. His voice was almost a whisper. "That's him." "That's your father," she said. "He looks like me." She wanted to say "you look like him," but the words were too heavy too soon. "Would you like to unpack?" He did. 2 shirts, a pair of jeans, a sketchbook, a toothbrush, that was all. No toys, no keepsakes, just survival items. That night she stood outside his door listening. The creak of bed springs, the scratch of pencil on paper. When she peeked in, he was drawing lines neat, deliberate, too skilled for a boy his age. "What are you working on?" she asked softly. "Just something for Mom," he said. She nodded. "It's beautiful." He didn't look up. "She likes when I draw." Emily stepped back into the hall, heart twisting. There were no manuals for this kind of silence, the kind shared between 2 people who have lost the same man in different ways. For the first time in years, she didn't fall asleep to emptiness. She fell asleep to the sound of pencil strokes, steady, rhythmic, like the heartbeat of a home learning to breathe again. 2 days later, the phone rang again. "Mrs. Carter." "Yes." "This is Jenna, Ruiz's hospice nurse. She's asked to see you." Emily froze. Jenna Ruiz, the mother, the woman who had loved Daniel when she thought she still had him. Part of Emily wanted to say no, to leave the past buried, but Marines don't run from duty, not even this kind. "I'll come," she said quietly. The hospice smelled of antiseptic and lavender. The hallway walls were lined with paper butterflies, fragile, temporary, beautiful. In room 204, a thin woman lay propped against white pillows, dark hair pulled back, oxygen tube tracing her cheek. When she saw Evan, her face softened. "You came," she whispered. He rushed to her bedside, small hands clutching hers. Emily stood at the foot of the bed, awkward, intrusive. "You must be Mrs. Carter," Jenna said, her voice papery but kind. "I am," Emily replied. "Thank you for coming. I wasn't sure you would." "I wasn't sure either," Emily admitted. Jenna smiled faintly. "Fair enough." Evan squeezed her hand. "Mom, she said I could stay with her." Jenna's eyes glistened. "Good, she'll take care of you. Your dad would have wanted that." Emily's throat tightened. "Did you know I existed?" Jenna hesitated, then nodded weakly. "I knew, but by the time I found out I was pregnant, he was gone. And by the time I thought to write, I told myself you'd hate me, or worse, pity me." Looking at her pale, thin, exhausted, Emily couldn't summon hate. Life itself was punishment enough. "He never knew," Emily said quietly. "No," Jenna whispered. "I wanted to tell him, then the knock came on my door." The same knock that had once come on Emily. Evan looked between them, confusion etched across his face. "You both knew Dad." Emily forced a smile. "We did." "Was he nice?" She looked to Jenna, who nodded faintly. Emily took a breath. He was steady, the kind of man who made everyone around him braver. Jenna closed her eyes, tears sliding down. "That sounds like him." A nurse entered, adjusted the IV. "She needs rest," she said softly. Outside, the caseworker spoke in hushed tones. "She doesn't have long, maybe days." In the hallway, Evan whispered, "Can we come back tomorrow?" "Yes," Emily said, "we'll come back tomorrow." That night, he didn't touch his dinner, just sat at the table tracing circles on the wood grain. "Mom's going to die, isn't she?" Emily couldn't lie. "Yes, sweetheart, she is." He nodded, jaw trembling, eyes dry. "Do people go to heaven?" "I think the good ones do." "Then she'll be fine," he said quietly. He was trying to sound strong. She reached across the table, covered his small hand with hers. He didn't pull away. That tiny gesture felt like the first bridge between them, fragile, uncertain, real. When she tucked him into bed later, he clutched his sketchbook like a lifeline. Through the thin wall, she heard soft pencil strokes again, grief in graphite lines. Emily stood by the mantle, eyes on Daniel's folded flag. For 10 years, it had been a monument to endings. Now, somehow, it felt like the beginning of something she couldn't yet name. She whispered to the empty room, "He's here, Daniel, your son's here." And in the stillness that followed, for the first time in 10 years, the silence didn't echo. It listened. The day after Jenna's visit, the sky broke open with rain. Carolina storms had their own temperament, not gentle, not violent, just a steady reminder that the world kept moving, even when you didn't. Emily stood at the kitchen window, watching droplets trail down the glass like small regrets. Behind her, Evan sat at the table, sketchbook open, pencil motionless. His breakfast went untouched, cold pancakes, syrup gathering in the corners of his plate. He hadn't said much since the hospice. He didn't need to. His silence was fluent. "You ready to go?" she asked quietly. He nodded too quickly, as if obedience could erase fear. At the hospice, the hall smelled the same, lavender and loss. When they entered room 204 again, Jenna smiled weakly. Her voice was thinner now, breath short and measured. "Hey, soldier," she whispered to Evan, "you came back." He climbed into the chair beside her, clutching her hand with both of his. "I brought your favorite," he said, pulling a folded paper from his sketchbook, a drawing of her surrounded by butterflies. Jenna smiled, tears pooling but not falling. "It's perfect." Then her eyes shifted to Emily. "You've been kind to him, thank you." Emily shook her head. "He's easy to care for." "That's not the same as easy to love." The words landed softly, but deep. Emily didn't respond, just reached to adjust the blanket at the foot of the bed. "Promise me something," Jenna said, her voice barely audible. "Anything." "Let him draw, even when it doesn't make sense. That's how he speaks when he can't find words." Emily nodded. "I will." Jenna smiled faintly, as if checking off the last box of a long list. Then she closed her eyes. "You'll do fine," she whispered, "both of you." That was the last real conversation they had. 3 days later, before dawn, the hospice called. By the time they arrived, Jenna was gone. Evan stood beside the bed, sketchbook clutched tight against his chest. The nurse handed Emily a brown envelope. The mother's effects, a death certificate, a small locket with a tiny photo of Daniel inside. Emily slipped it over Evan's neck. "You can keep it close," she said softly. He nodded. Was she scared? "I think she was tired," Emily replied, "but she wasn't alone." He looked at her, then really looked, and said, "Because we came." Driving home, the boy sat silent, the locket resting against his heart. The road stretched long and gray, pine trees whipping by like soldiers on parade. Emily glanced at him in the mirror. His face was pale, his eyes fixed on the horizon, but he wasn't breaking. Not yet. When they got home, he went straight to the guest room, closed the door, and didn't come out for hours. Emily stood in the hallway listening. No crying, no sound, just the slow, deliberate scrape of pencil against paper. She turned toward the mantle, where the folded flag sat between Daniel's medals. For 10 years, that flag had meant one thing: loss. Now somehow it meant responsibility, continuation. "Your son's here," she whispered, "and I don't think he's leaving." The next morning, Emily did what she'd always done when life got too heavy. She made pancakes. Because that's what people do when words aren't enough. The kitchen filled with the smell of butter and batter. Evan sat at the table, head resting on his arms, eyes fixed on the window. The sky was gray, still heavy. "Blueberries or plain?" she asked. He shrugged. "Don't care." She made both. When she placed the plate in front of him, he stared at it for a long moment before whispering, "Did my dad like pancakes?" Emily smiled faintly. "He loved them, burned them every Sunday." That earned half a smile, small, fragile, but real. They ate mostly in silence, the kind that didn't feel uncomfortable, just cautious. The kind that comes before trust. For a woman who'd lived alone for a decade, the noise of another person breathing in her home felt both foreign and comforting, like hearing music from a room you thought was empty. But peace never lasted long in marine towns. CPS scheduled weekly check-ins. The caseworker, clipboard in hand, arrived with the forced brightness of someone who'd seen too many homes fall apart. She asked the usual questions: meals, bedtime, emotions. Evan answered everyone with "fine." When she turned to Emily, "And how are you adjusting?" Emily echoed him. "Fine." They were both lying, politely. At the grocery store, an old church acquaintance spotted her. "Oh, Emily," she said too brightly, "I didn't know you had company." "This is Evan," Emily replied evenly, "my husband's son." The pause was short but heavy. "Well, bless your heart for stepping up. Not everyone would." Emily smiled thinly. "Not everyone should." By Sunday, the whispers had spread. In towns like Jacksonville, gossip traveled faster than radio signals. The story had already rewritten itself. The Marine widow took in her husband's love child. At work, her manager asked if she needed time off. "No," she said, "I'm fine." She always said she was fine. That evening, she found Evan sitting on the porch steps, sketching. The sunset painted the pines gold, but he wasn't drawing that. When she looked closer, she saw he was sketching the folded flag through the window, the one on the mantle. "You draw a lot," she said, sitting beside him. "It helps me think." "About your mom?" He nodded, then added, "About Dad, too. I don't really know him, just what people say. What do they say? That he was brave, that he died a hero, that he helped people. He paused. Was he? Emily looked out at the fatting sun. Yes, but being brave doesn't mean never making mistakes. It means facing them. Did he make mistakes? We all do, she said softly. He nodded, thoughtful, then went back to drawing. That night Emily heard quiet sobs through the thin walls. She sat outside his door, back against the wood, not saying a word. Sometimes silence said more than comfort ever could. Days passed, then came another knock. Not gentle, official. A CPS supervisor this time, knew bad, same suspicion. Routine welfare check, she said, stepping past the threshold without waiting for permission. Emily recognized that tone, the tone of bureaucrats protecting themselves from blame. They opened cupboards, checked the fridge, counted prescriptions. The older one took notes on a tablet. When they left, the house felt smaller, violated. Evan sat on the couch, wide-eyed. Did I do something wrong? No, sweetheart, Emily said, voice steady but trembling underneath. They just don't know us yet. He hesitated. Are they gonna take me away? No one's taking you anywhere, she said firmly. That night, she called her sister for the first time in years. Did you do it? She asked flatly. Do what? Report me. Silence, then her sister's voice, sharp but uncertain. You shouldn't have taken that boy in. He's not your responsibility. Everyone's talking, Emily. They think you've lost it. I didn't lose anything, Emily said. I'm trying to give something back. Her sister scoffed. You're trying to rewrite the past. You can't fix Daniel's mistakes by adopting his. That word, mistake, hit harder than any slap. Emily hung up before she said something she couldn't take back. That night she printed everything, every form, every school record, every grocery receipt, and slid each page into a binder. It was military, methodical, evidence of duty, proof of love. Evan noticed. Why are you doing all that? Because sometimes people need to see what words can't prove. He nodded. Mom used to do that too. Keep papers. Yeah, stuff that showed she was trying. Emily smiled softly. Then maybe she and I aren't so different. For the first time he looked up and smiled, small, shy, real. By the end of the week, CPS cleared the report. Unsubstantiated, bureaucratic language for "we believe you." Emily showed Evan the letter. See, they know we're okay. He traced the letterhead with one finger. Do you believe it? She laughed quietly. Not yet, but I'm working on it. That weekend, she took him to the park. He didn't play, just sat under an oak sketching branches. She joined him. You know, she said, when Marines don't know what to do, they make a plan. He didn't look up. What kind of plan? Something small, pancakes on Sunday, mowing the lawn, you teaching me how to draw. He glanced sideways at her. You can't draw. I can learn, she said. You'll be my instructor. That earned a smile. They spent the afternoon sketching the tree, her lines crooked, his perfect. When they finished, he handed her the pencil. You did okay. High praise, she said. When they got home, she taped his drawing to the refrigerator. He didn't comment, but later that night she saw him look at it twice before bed. The house no longer felt like a museum of memories. It felt alive. She whispered to the empty air, We're doing okay, Daniel, even if no one believes it yet. A few weeks later, the peace cracked again. The doorbell rang just as Emily was packing Evan's lunch. 2 CPS agents, same brittle smiles. Mrs. Carter, we received another report. Evan froze mid-bite, his small shoulders tensing. Did I do something? No, honey, she said softly. Eat your breakfast. The agents moved through the house like ghosts with checklists. Every drawer, every room. When they left, the silence was unbearable. Emily sat at the table, hands trembling around a cold cup of coffee. Evan watched her carefully. "You mad?" "Not at you," she said. "Just tired of people pretending to know us." He nodded slowly. "Kids said stuff at school too." "What kind of stuff?" "That I'm a charity case, that my dad cheated, that you're not really my family." The words hit harder than any inspection. "Who said that?" she asked quietly. He shrugged. "Doesn't matter, they said you took me out of guilt." Emily swallowed hard. "Listen to me, Evan, we don't live for their stories, we live for the truth, and the truth is you're mine to protect, always." He didn't answer, just nodded and went to his room. That night she couldn't sleep, so she turned the kitchen light on and built what she called the marine binder. 3 inches thick by dawn. Evidence, schedules, receipts, proof of love printed in triplicate. When Evan came down for breakfast, he stared at it. "What's that?" "Our defense," she said simply. He grinned, the first grin she'd seen in days. "Looks like we'll win." "Damn right," she whispered, then smiled at her own slip. At school drop-off, a woman from church approached her, too sweet voice dripping sympathy. "If you ever need help, Emily, there are programs for women in your situation." "What situation is that?" "You know, raising another woman's child." Emily's smile was razor-thin. "You mean raising my husband's son?" The woman blushed, muttered something about prayer and left. Driving home, Emily heard Daniel's voice in her mind, teasing calm. "Let them talk, Em, we know who we are." That night, Evan handed her a drawing. Her at the kitchen table, binder open, him standing beside her. Above it he'd written in careful block letters, "Team Carter." She felt her throat tighten. "This is us." He nodded. "We're a team, right?" "Always," she said. That night, as she placed the drawing beside the folded flag, she whispered, "They can call it whatever they want, Daniel, but this is our family now." And for the first time in years, she believed it. The morning of the custody, notice arrived like a storm, wrapped in an envelope. Plain paper, government seal, black ink that could decide the course of a child's life. Emily read the first line twice before the meaning landed. Petition for custody, Luis Ruiz, maternal uncle. Her stomach turned cold. The same system that had accused her twice now wanted to hand Evan over to a man she'd never met. She called the caseworker immediately. "Who is he?" she asked, voice steady but sharp. The woman hesitated. "The boy's mother's brother. He lives in Georgia. He's filed a claim for guardianship." Emily gripped the receiver. "Does he even know Evan?" "Not personally," the caseworker admitted, "but there are survivor benefits attached to your late husband's file." There it was, the motive. Money, always money. "What are his circumstances?" Emily asked. The woman sighed. "Prior arrests, DUIs, unstable housing, but legally we have to review every claim." Emily looked at the marine binder on the counter, thick, organized, precise. "I'm ready," she said. That night she told Evan. He froze mid-bite at the dinner table, fork clinking against the plate. "Do I have to go?" "No," she said quickly, "I'll handle it." "Will they make me live with him?" "Not if I have anything to say about it." He nodded, but his small hands trembled. Later, when she checked on him, he was quietly packing his backpack, socks, sketchbook, toothbrush. Preparing for exile. "Hey," she said softly from the doorway, "you planning to run away?" He looked down, "Just getting ready in case." She knelt beside him, touched his shoulder. "You don't need a backup plan, you have me." He swallowed hard. "Why are you doing all this for me? You don't even know if I'm really his kid." The words hit like a bullet. Emily inhaled slowly. "Because I know what he'd want me to do, because you're here, and because you deserve someone who shows up." He turned away, embarrassed by his own tears. But just before he drifted to sleep, she heard him whisper, "Thanks." The next morning, she found a new drawing on the fridge. Same image as before, her at the table, him beside her, but above it he'd written, Semper Fi. The letters were misspelled, crooked, beautiful. She touched the page with a trembling smile. "Always faithful," she murmured. "You got that right." The courthouse in Onslow County was a squat brick building that smelled of old paper and coffee that had burned too long on the pot. Emily ironed her blouse the night before, polished her shoes, and packed the binder like a soldier packing for deployment. Evan stayed with Mrs. Perez, the neighbor who baked cookies and didn't ask questions. He hugged her before she left. "Good luck," he said quietly. "Bring me home." She promised she would. Inside the courthouse, the air was cold enough to make her knuckles ache. The caseworker met her at the hallway bench. "Luis Ruiz didn't hire an attorney," she whispered. "He's representing himself." "Good," Emily said. "So am I." When the bailiff called their case, she walked to the table, binder clutched tight, and looked at the man across from her. Luis Ruiz was in his 40s, hair slicked back with too much gel, shirt wrinkled, eyes bloodshot. He didn't look dangerous, just hollow. A man who'd spent a lifetime running from his own chances. The judge adjusted her glasses. "Mr. Ruiz, you're petitioning for custody of your nephew." "Yes, ma'am, I'm his blood." The word blood hung in the air like a weapon. The judge turned to Emily. "Mrs. Carter, you currently have temporary guardianship, correct?" "Yes, Your Honor." "You may proceed." Emily stood. "My husband, Staff Sergeant Daniel Carter, is the boy's father. I didn't know about him until his mother passed away. Since then, I've provided housing, schooling, and counseling. Evan has adjusted well. His grades are improving. He's seeing a pediatrician regularly." Luis muttered, "She ain't family." The judge's eyes flashed. "Mr. Ruiz, you'll have your turn." Emily continued. "Before she died, Evan's mother made it clear she wanted him to stay with me. There's a record of that conversation in hospice notes." She handed the folder forward. The clerk flipped through each page, photos, forms, the drawing labeled Team Carter. Luis shifted, uncomfortable. "He belongs with his own blood. I got a job lined up. I can give him a family." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Your employment record shows gaps, Mr. Ruiz." "I just need another chance," he said, voice cracking. "Everybody deserves one." Emily looked at him, not with anger but pity. "Especially children," she said quietly. The room fell silent. After a moment, the caseworker stood. "Your Honor, after home evaluations and school visits, we recommend permanent guardianship to Mrs. Carter. Mr. Ruiz's history includes multiple DUIs, evictions, and unstable housing." The judge nodded. "Mr. Ruiz, any further comments?" He shook his head, staring at the floor. The gavel came down. "Permanent guardianship granted to Mrs. Emily Carter. Mr. Ruiz may petition for visitation after 6 months of documented sobriety and employment." Just like that, it was done. Emily exhaled for what felt like the first time in months. As she turned to leave, Luis murmured, "He's got my sister's eyes, you know." She paused. "And his father's heart," she said softly. Outside, the winter air felt lighter. The caseworker smiled. "You did good, Emily. That was a hard one." "Hard's part of the job," she said. When she got home, Evan was waiting on the porch, sketchbook in his lap. "Did we win?" She knelt beside him. "We didn't win anything, we just made it official." "So I'm staying." "You're home," she said. He hugged her so tightly, it knocked the breath from her chest. "Good," he whispered. "I didn't want to pack again." That night, she left the binder on the kitchen counter. It wasn't just paperwork anymore. It was their story written in signatures, sealed in fingerprints. 2 days later, an envelope arrived from the Marine Corps League. Inside was a letter from Daniel's old commander. "We heard about the boy. You're doing what he would have done. If you're ever near Raleigh, the League would like to honor his son with a medal presentation. Emily read the words twice before the tears finally came. When she told Evan, his eyes lit up. They want me to get a medal. It's your dad's, she said. They're giving it to you. He looked toward the mantle at the folded flag. Will they play the song, the one with the trumpets? Taps, she said softly. Yes, they will. A week later, they drove to Raleigh. Emily wore a navy skirt suit. Evan wore a borrowed blazer and tie. The ceremony was small but dignified. A few Marines in dress blues, a commander at the podium. The hall smelled of polished wood and coffee. When the commander handed the medal to Evan, she saw Daniel in that boy's posture, straight back, chin up, no tears. Afterward, a woman approached holding a casserole dish like a peace offering. Her sister. I heard about the hearing, she said. I was wrong. Emily folded her arms. You were cruel. I thought you were making a mistake. So did I, Emily said softly. Then he called me Mom. Her sister's eyes softened. I'd like to meet him someday. We'll see, Emily said, if you can be kind. I can try. On the drive home, Evan fell asleep, metal glinting in the sunlight. One hand on the wheel, the other brushed his hair from his face as the highway stretched ahead, endless, open, finally theirs. When they pulled into the driveway, the porch light flickered on automatically, welcoming them home. The folded flag glowed faintly in the lamplight, no longer a symbol of death, but of legacy. Emily stood in the doorway, whispering to the empty air, We did it, Daniel. We brought him home. Spring rolled in slow that year. The air softened, the grass turned bright again. For the first time in a decade, Emily caught herself humming while folding laundry. The house no longer echoed. It had rhythm now, footsteps, laughter, the slam of a screen door, the quiet hum of something alive. Evan started 5th grade. His teacher said he was reserved but polite, code for still testing the ground. He packed his sketchbook before his lunch every morning, like armor. Their days found shape. Breakfast at 7, homework at 5, pancakes on Sunday. They didn't call it tradition, but that's what it became. One Saturday, Emily found him in the yard surrounded by dandelions, sketching. You've been out here all morning, she said, handing him lemonade. What are you working on? He turned the pad around. It was the folded flag, but this time drawn open, waving. Alive. She stared at it, throat tight. Why'd you draw it that way? He shrugged, because it doesn't look sad anymore. She had to turn away so he wouldn't see her cry. That night, alone in the bathroom, she wept quietly, not from grief, but from release. Something heavy inside her had finally lifted. Weeks later, her sister showed up again, same gray sedan, same hesitant smile. I wanted to apologize, she said. No casseroles, just words. Emily folded her arms. Go ahead. When Daniel died, you shut everyone out. We didn't know how to help. Then you took in that boy and I thought you were chasing ghosts. I was wrong. Emily said nothing, just listened. He looks like him, her sister added softly. Daniel around the eyes. He does, Emily said quietly. Her sister hesitated. Do you think I could meet him sometime? Maybe, Emily said. If you can be kind, that's the rule here. Her sister smiled faintly. I can do that. They didn't hug, not yet. But when she drove away, Emily didn't feel angry anymore, just lighter. That Sunday, Evan begged her to try baseball. I'm not good, he warned, but I want to learn. So she bought 2 gloves and a ball. The first few throws were disasters, missed catches, laughter, grass stains. But then he caught one, clean. He looked up, eyes wide. Did you see that? I did, she said. You're a natural. Can we do this every weekend? Every one you want. On the way home, they stopped for ice cream. He chose mint chocolate chip, his mom's favorite. He didn't say that out loud, but she knew. Life began to feel ordinary again. Ordinary but sacred. Late one evening, she found Evan sitting at the kitchen table under a single light, sketching in silence. "What's this one?" she asked. He smiled faintly. "A house, ours." He turned the page toward her. Two figures stood on the porch beneath a roof with a crooked chimney. Above the door he'd written, "Semper Fi Home Edition." Emily laughed through her tears. "You and that Latin." "It's our motto," he said. "Means we stick together right." "Always," she whispered. She placed the drawing beside the folded flag on the mantle. For 10 years that flag had marked an ending. Now it marked the beginning of everything that came after. Outside, the wind moved through the pines, soft and certain. And in that quiet house that once echoed with loss, Emily finally understood. Family isn't blood, it's who shows up and stays. Snow came late that year. Not much, just a soft dusting that turned the Carolina pines white for a night or two. Evan pressed his face to the window, watching flakes drift past the porch light. "Mom loved snow," he said quietly. "She said it made everything look new." Emily smiled faintly. "It does for a while at least." He nodded, thoughtful in that way he had, like a boy who'd seen too much of life too soon. That winter felt different. For the first time in a decade, the house didn't echo. There were footsteps, laughter, the occasional slammed door. Noise, beautiful human noise. Every morning, Emily packed his lunch while he tied his shoes, humming off-key. He always tucked his sketchbook into his bag last, like armor for whatever the day might throw. At night, they sat at the kitchen table. She reviewed work schedules. He did homework or drew. Their silence wasn't the old kind, not the silence of grief. It was companionable, lived in, safe. But safety never lasted long for Marines or their families. It started with a phone call. Her mother. Emily hadn't heard that voice since the funeral. 10 years of distance, one ring away. "Emily," her mother began, careful, practiced. "Your sister told me about the boy." Emily exhaled slowly. "His name is Evan." "I know, she showed me a picture. He looks well like Daniel." There was a pause then. "I'd like to meet him." Emily gripped the counter. "Now you want to meet him?" "I should have reached out sooner. I wasn't sure if I'd answer." Emily's voice sharpened. "You didn't try." "I didn't know how," her mother said softly. "After Daniel died, you shut us all out. I thought giving you space was mercy." "You call a decade of silence mercy." "Please, Emily," her mother said. "Don't make this harder than it already is. The boy's part of this family. He deserves to know that." Emily closed her eyes. She could feel old wounds pressing against new ones. "Fine," she said at last, "but I'll be there." They met at a diner off Highway 17, the same one where she and Daniel used to get coffee before his deployments. Emily sat in the corner booth, watching the door. When her mother entered, she was wearing her Sunday dress, neat, pressed, like she was going to church. When she saw Evan, she froze. Hand to her chest, eyes soft with something between awe and regret. "Lord," she whispered, "he's Daniel all over again." Evan, polite as ever, stood up and held out his hand. "Nice to meet you, ma'am." Her mother blinked fast, her composure cracking. "You don't have to call me ma'am. You can call me grandma if you want." Evan looked at Emily, waiting for approval. She nodded once. "Okay," he said simply. The rest came slowly, small talk, gentle questions. His drawings, his school, his favorite breakfast. By dessert they were laughing, soft, careful but real. When he showed her his sketch of the folded flag, she touched the page reverently. "He had that same focus," she murmured. "Your daddy." Emily watched quietly. For 10 years she'd hated her mother's silence. But sitting there now, watching her trace the outline of Evan's drawing with trembling fingers, something inside her shifted. Maybe silence wasn't cruelty, maybe it was fear. When they got home, Evan said, "She's not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "Someone who didn't want me." Emily smiled softly. "You'll find most people aren't what you expect." That night, he placed the sketch of the flag beside the folded one on the mantle. 2 generations of service. One still learning what the word faithful really meant. Spring came early that year. Evan joined the school art club. He'd grown taller, sharper around the edges, a boy becoming something steadier. One afternoon, he came home waving a permission slip. "Art show," he said breathlessly. "They're picking one drawing from each grade." Emily smiled. "Which one are you submitting?" "The flag," he said simply, "the one that's open." Weeks passed. The night of the show arrived. The school gym smelled like sawdust and pride. Parents milled around with paper cups of punch, whispering over the exhibits like they were in a museum. Evan's piece hung in the center, the folded flag, drawn open, flying free. Below it, in careful handwriting, "Evan Carter, grade 5. When the principal called his name, he stood frozen for half a beat. Then he walked forward, small shoulders squared, chin up. He accepted the ribbon with both hands, just like a Marine taking a medal. When it was over, the principal invited Emily to say a few words. Her heart jumped. Public speaking was never her battlefield. But Evan's eyes found hers steady, waiting. She walked up to the microphone, cleared her throat. "Pride comes in many shapes," she said softly. "Sometimes it's folded, sometimes it's framed. Either way, it means love." Applause filled the room. Evan blushed scarlet, half hiding behind his certificate. On the drive home, the ribbon rested on the dashboard, catching the glow of streetlights. "You proud of me?" he asked quietly. Emily smiled. "I've been proud since the day you walked through that door." He didn't say anything after that, just leaned his head against the window, smiling faintly. Summer crept in slow. Baseball became their ritual Saturday mornings at the park, gloves worn and dusty, laughter echoing down the field. Sometimes he'd miss a catch and throw his glove down in frustration, and Emily would call out, "Marines don't quit." He'd grin and shout back, "I'm not a Marine." Then train like one. By August, he could catch 3 out of 4 throws clean. One afternoon after practice, he said, "Do you ever miss him, Dad?" "Every day," she said. "Even after what happened?" "Especially after," she admitted. "He made mistakes. So did I, but loving someone doesn't stop because the story went wrong." He nodded quiet. "I think he'd like us. I think he'd be proud of you." The next morning, she found a new drawing on the kitchen table, her throwing a baseball, him catching it midair. Above them, in looping letters, "Team Carter, always faithful." She framed it and hung it by the door. Life settled into something that almost looked like peace. But peace, she'd learned, was just another kind of test. Late that summer, Evan came home from school quieter than usual. When she asked how his day was, he just said, "Fine." But that night she found his sketchbook open on the table, pages of dark scribbles, sharp lines, faces half erased. She recognized the signs, the quiet storm before grief resurfaced. "What's wrong?" she asked gently. He shrugged, "Nothing." "You can tell me." He looked up, eyes glossy but stubborn. "Some kids said my dad cheated, that you took me out of guilt." Emily froze. It was the same poison she'd heard whispered in grocery aisles years ago. She knelt beside him. "Do you believe them?" He shook his head. "No, but it makes me mad." She nodded. "It should, but anger's like fire. If you hold it too long, it burns you too." He studied her face. "How'd you stop being mad?" She smiled sadly. "I didn't. I just learned to aim it at something useful." He tilted his head. "Like what?" "Like building this life," she said. "Like pancakes on Sundays, like art shows and baseball." He smiled faintly. "That's not revenge." No, she said, it's better. Autumn came again, and with it, another letter from the Marine Corps League, this one addressed to Evan directly. Inside, a certificate with gold trim. Award of recognition for exemplary spirit and honor. He ran a thumb over the seal, smiling. They really think I have honor. Emily laughed. You've earned it. He looked up, serious now. Do you? Do I what? Have honor? The question caught her off guard. She thought of all the choices she'd made, the silence, the fear, the stubbornness that had kept her alone for a decade. Then she looked at him. I'm trying, she said softly, every day. That night they sat on the porch in the fading light. The air smelled like pine and distant rain. Evan leaned against her shoulder. You think Dad can see us? She smiled. If he can't, he's missing out. The porch light flickered on, chasing away the dark. For the first time in a long time, Emily felt something she hadn't dared to name since that knock at the door so many years ago. Hope. Quiet, steady, earned. The following spring, she woke early one morning to the smell of coffee and something burning. Evan stood at the stove, spatula in hand, trying to flip pancakes that had already surrendered to chaos. Morning, chef, she teased. He looked up, grinning. You said Dad used to burn them. I thought I'd keep the tradition alive. She laughed, covering her mouth to hide tears that weren't quite sad. He plated the disaster proudly. I call them Marine style, overcooked but loyal. Perfect, she said, taking a bite. They ate at the table, sunlight spilling across the plates. For the first time in years, Emily didn't think about loss or duty or the whispers of others. Just the simple fact that love, once broken, had been rebuilt. After breakfast, Evan reached for his sketchbook. What are you drawing now? She asked. He smiled. A flag, but not the folded kind. She nodded. Good. And for the first time since that knock on the door all those years ago, she felt something like peace. Not because the pain was gone, but because it had finally found its place in the story. She looked at him, the boy who had carried two families, grief, and somehow turned it into art, and whispered under her breath. Semper Fi, kid, always faithful. Outside, the wind moved through the pines again. And the house that once felt like a tomb of memory now breathed, steady and alive. The year Evan turned 13, the house changed tempo. The music got louder, the questions got sharper, and the silences, they grew longer, heavier, full of thoughts he couldn't quite say out loud. Adolescence arrived the way summer storms do, without warning, without apology. One day he was a boy sketching flags in pencil. The next, he was a young man closing his door and drawing in charcoal, darker, faster, restless. Emily watched from the doorway sometimes, trying not to hover. He was taller than her now, all elbows, sneakers, and half-tamed hair. Every time he walked by, she caught a glimpse of Daniel in the slope of his shoulders, in that instinctive calm when the world pressed too hard. She'd expected rebellion. Instead, what she got was distance, quiet, polite, unnerving distance. Everything okay at school? She asked one night over dinner. Yeah. Friends? He shrugged, kinda. You eating enough? He smirked. You sound like Grandma. That earned her a laugh, soft but real. Still, something lived behind his eyes, a restlessness that sketches couldn't quite hold anymore. He started staying after school for projects. When she asked what kind, he just said, art stuff. Then one evening he came home with paint on his hands, cheeks flushed, and a grin she hadn't seen in months. They picked me, he said breathlessly, the mural contest for the town square. The one by City Hall. He nodded, eyes bright. They wanted something about legacy. I told them I had an idea. What idea? You'll see, he said. For weeks, she watched him plan, sketching designs across poster paper that covered the kitchen table. Sometimes he'd ask about Daniel, not the Marine but the man. What did he laugh like? Did he ever mess up dinner? What made him want to join? She answered what she could. The rest she let stay sacred. When the mural finally went up, the whole town came to watch. It stretched across the old brick wall near the courthouse, a flag unfurling into a horizon, silhouettes of families standing beneath it, hands joined. At the bottom corner, in looping letters, it read, "Legacy is what remains when love refuses to die." The mayor clapped. Reporters snapped photos. But all Emily saw was her son standing there, paint-streaked and proud, finally claiming his place in a story bigger than rumor. After the crowd left, she ran a finger along the last line of his signature, Evan R. Carter. "You added Ruiz," she said quietly. He nodded. "She deserves it too." That night she couldn't sleep. She lay awake listening to the soft hum of the refrigerator, the faint scratch of his pencil upstairs. Grief and pride so different, yet somehow the same size inside her chest. Autumn brought change again. Evan entered high school, traded sketchbooks for canvases, and started spending weekends volunteering at the Veterans Center, helping paint the rec room walls. When Emily asked why, he shrugged. They tell good stories. One afternoon, she stopped by to pick him up and found him sitting with an old Marine in a wheelchair. The man was showing him a faded photo, 3 young soldiers laughing in the desert. "That's your dad," the man said, tapping the center face. "Couldn't shoot worth a damn but knew how to fix anything." Evan smiled, studying the photo like a map to a place he'd never been. When he saw Emily in the doorway, he lifted the picture. "You knew him." The veteran chuckled. Everyone knew Carter, the steady one, the one who never complained. Emily swallowed hard. That sounds like him. On the drive home, Evan was quiet for a long time. Finally he said, "I think I get why he joined." "Why that?" "Because he believed in things that last." She nodded, eyes on the road. "That's the best reason there is." That night, he pinned a copy of that photo to his wall, between his art awards and the medal Daniel's commander had given him. The holidays arrived before either of them noticed. Emily put up the tree she hadn't touched since Daniel's last Christmas. Evan helped, half complaining, half pretending not to care. He found Daniel's old ornament, a silver Marine Corps emblem, and hung it at eye level. When they finished, the house smelled like pine and cinnamon. Evan flopped onto the couch. "We actually look normal." She laughed. "Don't tell anyone. I have a reputation for being mysterious." He grinned, then hesitated. "Can I ask something kinda weird?" "Always. Do you ever wish you met me sooner?" She looked at the lights twinkling against the window. "Every day. Even though I was planned." She smiled softly. "The best things never are." He leaned his head on her shoulder. For a while they sat that way, the glow from the tree flickering across the walls, the house breathing slow and steady. When spring returned, life threw another test, small but sharp. Rumors again. This time not about her, about him. Some kids at school had found out his full story, the father, the widow, the custody battle, and turned it into cafeteria gossip. He came home tight-jawed, eyes wet with anger he didn't want her to see. "I'm fine," he said when she asked. She waited. He slammed his backpack down. "They said I don't even belong to a real family." Emily stood very still. Then she said quietly, "Come with me." They drove to the veterans' cemetery. The sky was overcast, the grass damp from morning rain. She stopped by Daniel's grave, simple white stone, clean, quiet. "This is where your story started," she said, "and where mine almost ended." Evan stared at the headstone, jaw tight. "I don't like that they can just talk about him like they know." "They don't," she said. "Most people talk about what they can't understand." He nodded slowly. "You still come here a lot." "Less than I used to," she smiled faintly, Because part of him's home now. He looked up at her, realization flickering. You mean me? She nodded. For a long time they stood in silence. Then he reached down and straightened the small flag planted in the soil. Semper Fi, he whispered. As they walked back to the car, Emily realized that for the first time, he wasn't just visiting his father's memory. He was claiming his own. That summer, the local newspaper ran a piece about the mural. The photo showed Evan standing in front of it, hands in his pockets, paint smudged on his jeans. The headline read, "A Marine Son Paints Legacy on Brick." The story spread small-town fame, polite nods at the grocery store. At church, people stopped whispering and started smiling. Some even apologized. One Sunday, the pastor asked if she'd like to speak at the veterans' service. She hesitated, then said yes. When she stood at the pulpit, her hands shook. The crowd blurred faces she knew, faces that had judged, faces that had forgotten. I used to think loyalty meant silence, she began. That grief was something you carried alone to honor the ones you lost. But loyalty isn't quiet. It's consistent. It's showing up, even when no one's watching. Her voice steadied. 10 years ago, I lost a husband. Then one phone call gave me a son. Everything after that was grace disguised as chaos. The church was still when she finished. Then came the applause, not loud, just long. The kind that means understanding, not performance. Afterward, an elderly woman approached her. "That boy of yours," she said softly, "he's the best thing this town's seen in years." Emily smiled. "He's the best thing I've ever seen." By the time Evan turned 15, the porch had filled with sketches, rolled canvases leaning against the railing, paper drying in the sun. He was taller now, voice deeper, the easy humor of his age sitting right next to the seriousness of someone twice as old. One evening, she caught him staring at the folded flag on the mantle. "What are you thinking?" she asked. He shrugged. "About college, maybe art school." "Far away." "Maybe." She tried to keep her voice steady. "That's good. The world's big. It's waiting for you." He looked at her. "You'd be okay if I left." She smiled, though it hurt a little. "I'd miss you every minute, but I'd be proud every second." He nodded, still unsure. "I don't want to leave you alone again." She reached out, cupped his face. "You're not leaving me, you're continuing me." He didn't answer, just leaned forward, resting his forehead against hers for a heartbeat before heading upstairs. When she was sure he couldn't hear, she whispered into the quiet, "Thank you, Daniel, for sending him." That fall, he brought home a new painting. A house under a night sky, light spilling from the windows, two figures sitting on the porch, one older, one younger. Above them, stars shaped like folded flags. "It's us," he said shyly. "I'm submitting it for the state exhibition." She studied the brushstrokes, every one deliberate, patient, alive. "It's beautiful," she said. "What's it called?" He smiled, "Home front." She touched his arm. "Perfect." Weeks later, a letter came in the mail. He'd won. His painting would hang in the Raleigh Museum of Art for the next year. When they stood there on opening night, surrounded by strangers and bright lights, Emily realized something quietly miraculous. The story that had begun with death had grown into art, into legacy, into healing. She stood beside him, watching people pause to read the small plaque beneath his painting. Evan Ruiz Carter, home front. Below it, his description, a tribute to those who rebuild instead of surrender. Emily closed her eyes for a moment, letting the words sink in. That was it. That was Daniel's message, her own mission, their shared inheritance. Later, as they drove home through the dark, Evan asked, "You think he'd be proud?" She smiled through quiet tears. "I know he would." The headlights cut through the night, the road stretching ahead like a promise. And as the city lights faded behind them, Emily thought of all the battles she'd fought, the quiet ones, the ones no one wrote about. Not wars with guns, but wars of persistence, of compassion, of choosing to love anyway. In the end, she thought, dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. And somewhere in the stillness between heartbeats and highway lines, she felt Daniel's steady voice again, calm as ever. "You did good, Em." She smiled at the empty seat beside her, whispering, "We did better than good. We finished the fight." The flag at home would still be folded. But their story, that flag's story, was finally unfolding. The morning light came slow that day, gold spilling through the blinds like it didn't want to wake them too soon. Emily stood by the window, coffee in hand, watching the world stretch awake. Evan's acceptance letter sat open on the counter. Raleigh School of the Arts, full scholarship. The words glowed like something too big for the small kitchen they lived in. He hadn't stopped smiling since it arrived. But beneath his excitement, she could feel a quiet ache beginning to take shape, hers, not his. It wasn't sadness exactly, it was the sound of letting go. When he came downstairs, backpack slung over one shoulder, she caught herself staring. When had he stopped being a boy? When had he become the kind of man Daniel would have saluted? He poured cereal without looking up. "You okay?" She smiled faintly, just trying to memorize this kitchen before it gets too quiet again. He paused mid-bite. "I'm not leaving for weeks." Time moves faster when you're pretending it doesn't. He rolled his eyes but smiled, that same crooked grin Daniel used to give when he didn't know what else to say. The weeks that followed were full of motion, boxes, lists, 1,000 small goodbyes. She helped him shop for dorm essentials, labeling everything like a mother preparing a soldier for deployment. Towels, sheets, coffee mug, first aid kit. He caught her tapping his name to a roll of socks. "Mom," he groaned, "I think I can handle identifying my own socks." She smiled. "Old habits die hard. Marines label everything." "You're not a Marine." "No," she said softly, "but I learned from the best." He laughed, then fell quiet. "You're gonna be okay here." She looked around the house. "It's not empty," she said. "It's just earned quiet." He studied her for a second. "You'll visit, right? Only if you pretend to be surprised every time." That night, while he packed the last box, she sat on the porch watching the stars come out. She could almost hear Daniel's voice again, low, steady, teasing. "You always hated goodbyes." She smiled into the night. "Still do." Move-in day arrived with summer heat and nervous laughter. The campus buzzed, parents unloading cars, students hauling boxes, new beginnings clattering on every sidewalk. Evan's dorm was small but bright, walls blank and full of promise. He unpacked fast, efficient, his father's discipline, his mother's precision. When the last box was empty, he stood in the doorway awkwardly, as if realizing the weight of the moment. "I guess this is it." She nodded, forcing a steady breath. "Looks like it." "Thanks for everything." She smiled. Everything was worth it. He hesitated, then hugged her hard, long, the kind of hug that says thank you and don't worry and I'll come back all at once. When she pulled away, her throat was tight. "Call me once a week." "Once a day," he promised. "Liar." He laughed. "Maybe twice a week then." As she drove away, she looked in the rearview mirror. He was standing by the dorm, hands in his pockets, watching her car disappear. For the first time since Daniel's funeral, she cried without shame, because this time the tears weren't for what she'd lost. They were for what she'd built. The house did grow quieter after that. No slamming doors, no pencil scratches at midnight. Just her and the hum of the old refrigerator, the rhythm of a woman relearning how to live with silence, not as a punishment, but as peace. She took a job at the base's outreach office, helping veterans' families with benefits and paperwork. The same forms that once defined her pain now became tools for helping others find their way through it. Some afternoons, she'd find herself staring at the photo of Daniel on her desk, uniform pressed, smile steady. She used to think that picture was a ghost. Now it just felt like company. One day, a young Marine widow came in barely 24, eyes red, hands shaking as she clutched a folder. "I don't know where to start," she whispered. Emily smiled softly. "Right here, you already did." By the time the woman left, she was breathing steadier. When the door closed, Emily sat back, exhaling slowly. The cycle had come full circle. That night she lit a candle by Daniel's flag and whispered, "Looks like we're still serving, just in different ways." Evan called every Sunday, video chats full of stories, art projects, and occasional complaints about cafeteria food. Behind him, his dorm room walls filled with sketches, new, colorful, alive. One afternoon, he turned the camera toward a large canvas. It was half finished, but she could see what it was becoming: a woman standing beneath a flag, eyes forward, hands steady. "That's you," he said simply. She blinked back tears. "It's beautiful." He smiled. "It's not done yet." Neither was she realized. Months passed. Then came the call that made her heart skip. Not a bad one, a proud one. "Mom," Evan said breathlessly, "the museum wants me to speak at the Veterans Art exhibit, about the mural, the paintings, all of it." Her breath caught. "You're giving a speech?" "Yeah, and they want you there." She could hear the nerves hiding behind his excitement. "You'll be fine," she said. "Speak from the heart, that's what people remember." He chuckled. "You should write speeches." She smiled. "I write life, you just paint it." The night of the exhibit, the museum glowed with soft light and murmured voices. Canvas after canvas lined the walls, stories of service, loss, recovery. But when she saw Evan's display, her breath stopped. His series was called Inheritance. Each painting showed a different stage of their journey. The folded flag, the kitchen table, the mural, and finally a new one, her face looking out a window, light on her hands, calm. When he stepped up to the podium, she couldn't breathe. He looked older than 18, taller, centered, his voice confident. "My father served his country," he said. "My mother served its memory. Everything I've painted is about that, the kind of courage that doesn't wear medals." He paused, scanning the crowd until his eyes found hers. "Courage," he continued, "isn't about what you face in battle. It's about what you rebuild after it's over." Applause rippled through the hall, soft, then rising, wave by wave. When it ended, she saw tears glinting in strangers' eyes. And for the first time in her life, Emily let herself feel the pride she'd always been too humble to name. That night, as they walked through the quiet streets outside the museum, Evan slipped his hands into his pockets. "You okay?" She laughed softly. "You keep asking me that. I think the answer's finally yes." He smiled. "Good, because I've been thinking about joining the reserves." She stopped walking. "The Marines?" He nodded. "Not full-time, just to serve. I want to know what he felt, what you felt." Her breath caught. Part of her wanted to say no, to protect him from everything she'd endured. But she saw something steady in his eyes, something she recognized. "You sure?" "I'm sure." She looked up at the stars, at the same stretch of sky she'd stared at for a decade of nights without Daniel. "Then make me one promise," she said. "Anything. When you wear that uniform, wear it for more than him. Wear it for everyone who carried you here." He nodded slowly. "I will." When the letter came, accepted to the reserves, she placed it beside the folded flag on the mantle. Different eras, same oath. The morning he left for training, she stood on the porch watching him load his duffel bag into the car. He turned back, smiling, nerves showing through. "You gonna cry?" She shook her head. "Not today." "Liar," he teased. She laughed. "Just go before I change my mind." He hugged her one last time. "Love you, Mom." "Always faithful," she whispered. When the car disappeared down the road, the quiet settled around her again, but this time it wasn't hollow. It was sacred. She went inside, sat at the kitchen table and wrote him a letter. "Evan, don't chase ghosts, carry them. Don't fight to be your father. Become the man he wanted to be. And remember, every time you stand tall, you're lifting two names, his and yours. Semper Fi." "Mom." She folded the letter and placed it beside his acceptance notice. Outside, the wind moved through the pines again, that same whisper she'd once mistaken for loneliness. Now she knew better. It was continuity. Weeks later, she received his first call from training. He sounded tired, proud, alive. "They made me squad leader," he said. "Of course they did." He laughed. "They said I've got your posture." She smiled. "That's just stubbornness disguised as dignity." After they hung up, she sat on the porch long after sunset, stars filling the dark like quiet witnesses. Her story had begun with loss, a widow, a folded flag, an empty house. Now it was ending with motion, a son, a purpose, a legacy reborn. She thought of that first knock on the door all those years ago, the sound that shattered everything. And she realized something simple, something she wished she could tell that younger version of herself. Some knocks don't end your story. They start the one you were meant to live. She smiled, tears quiet and warm. "Good night, Daniel," she whispered into the dark. "He's doing fine, we both are." And somewhere in memory, in spirit, in the steady rhythm of a flag waving against the night, she could almost hear him whisper back, "Semper Fi, M." She lifted her coffee cup toward the stars. "Always faithful," she murmured. Then, for the first time in a decade, Emily Carter let herself rest. The first letter came on a Thursday. Plain envelope, her name written in careful block letters. She recognized his handwriting instantly. It wasn't long, just a page, but she read it over and over like scripture. "Mom, training's harder than I thought, but I'm fine. The drill sergeants aren't as scary as you. Love you. Lee." She smiled, clutching the page to her chest. He'd written in pencil, smudged in places where sweat must have touched the paper. It smelled faintly of dirt and determination. That letter stayed on the kitchen counter for a week, then another came, then another. Every envelope held a piece of him, stories, jokes, sketches from the margins of training manuals. He wrote about his bunkmate from Ohio, about his first 10-mile march, about the blisters he refused to complain about. "You be proud, Mom," one letter said. "I folded my uniform tighter than anyone else here." The guys laughed until the sergeant said, "That's how it's done." I think I made Dad proud too. Every time she read that line, something inside her softened, the kind of ache that doesn't hurt anymore, it hums. As weeks passed, the house felt alive again, not because anyone was there but because he was out there. Every knock at the door used to freeze her blood. Now she met it with calm. She knew fear well enough to recognize its limits. Her neighbors asked how she managed to stay so composed. "I already lived the hardest goodbye," she said softly. "Everything after that is mercy." On Sundays, she wrote him back. Pages filled with news from town, stories about the neighbors, jokes about her new job. But beneath every line was the same message: "I'm still here. You're not alone." She never asked if he was scared. She knew better. Fear wasn't something you confessed. It was something you carried until it stopped feeling heavy. Months turned to a year. Evan completed training with honors. Then came the day she'd been waiting for and dreading in equal measure. Deployment. It wasn't combat, not officially. Just a humanitarian operation in a flood-struck region overseas. Still, when the call came, her hands trembled. He tried to sound brave on the phone. "It's not dangerous, Mom. We're helping rebuild schools. It's nothing like Dad's time." "I know," she said, "but promise me something." "Anything. Come home tired, not broken." He laughed softly. "That's such a you thing to say." "That's the point." When they hung up, she sat at the kitchen table staring at the folded flag. For years it had felt like an ending. Now it felt like a witness watching history repeat, but differently this time. He called when he could. Sometimes his voice cracked with exhaustion. Other times he sounded lighter than air. "Mom, you wouldn't believe the kids here. They smile at everything, even when they've got nothing. We built a roof today with scrap metal and prayer. The locals call us the Mud Marines. You'd love it." Each call was short, patchy with static but full of warmth. And every time she hung up, she whispered the same two words toward the quiet house: Semper Fi. Then came the silence. Weeks passed, no calls, no letters. She told herself it was normal, no service, no time. But deep down, that old fear stirred again. Every sound at the door made her heart jump. Every unknown number made her throat tighten. She still went to work, still smiled, still kept the porch light on. But inside, she was 12 years younger again, that same woman waiting for news she didn't want. One night, she finally called his unit's family liaison. "Just tell me he's okay," she said. The woman paused. "He's safe, ma'am. Communications are just limited right now." Safe. Such a small word, and yet it could breathe life back into a heart gone still. A week later, another letter came. Different handwriting this time, not his. Her stomach sank before she even opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a photograph. Evan, standing knee-deep in muddy water, smiling beside a local child holding a makeshift toy boat. Below the photo, in careful penmanship, "Your son asked us to send this. He's fine, helping us rebuild. Tell him his art lives here." No rank, no signature, just that, a kindness from a stranger halfway around the world. She held the photo to her heart and finally let herself cry. Not because of fear this time, because of gratitude. He was out there doing exactly what he was meant to do, building where others had fallen, mending what time had torn. Months later he came home. Thinner, stronger, wiser. She met him at the airport, tears streaming as she ran into his arms. He lifted her off the ground, laughing. "You're still shorter." "And you're still mine," she said, clinging tight. When they got home, she noticed something new about him, not just maturity but depth. His eyes carried calm, not the kind you fake, but the kind earned through seeing too much and surviving it. He unpacked slowly, setting his uniform neatly on the bed. Then he pulled out a small tin wrapped in cloth. "Brought you something." Inside were fragments, bits of clay, small stones, a broken piece of painted wood. "They're from the school we rebuilt," he said. "Thought you'd like to have a piece of it." She touched each item carefully. "You turned rubble into memory." He smiled softly. "Guess I learned from you." That night they sat on the porch like old times, stars thick across the sky. He told her stories of storms and laughter, of strangers who became family, of how art had kept him sane through the noise. At one point he said, "You know, I kept Dad's dog tags with me. Every time I touched them, I thought of you." She looked over, surprised. "Me?" He nodded. "He taught you courage. You taught me what to do with it." For a while neither spoke. The air was filled only with crickets and wind. Then softly she said, "You remind me of him, not in the way you look, but in the way you don't give up." He smiled. "You do too." Months passed. The world kept moving quietly without urgency. Evan began teaching art part-time at a local community center. Kids who had been through too much, just like him once. He'd come home covered in paint, talking about how they saw color where adults saw chaos. One evening, she stopped by to surprise him. The walls were full of murals, bright, bold, alive. In one corner, a group of kids painted a woman in uniform, holding a folded flag. He saw her and smiled. They said they wanted to paint a hero. She shook her head, tears in her eyes. You told them about me. He nodded. I told them you don't need to fight in a war to win one. That night, as she lay in bed, she thought about everything that had led here, every loss, every letter, every choice. Her life hadn't been easy, but it had been earned. The next morning, she stood at the mantle and unfolded the flag for the first time. It had been folded for 15 years, crisp, silent, untouchable. Now she spread it across the table, smoothing the creases one by one. Evan walked in and froze. You're unfolding it. She nodded, it's time. He stepped closer, it's beautiful. It always was, I just couldn't see it before. Together, they hung it on the wall above the fireplace. Not as a relic, but as a reminder of service, of sacrifice, of the love that had stitched two lives together from the torn edges of grief. She looked at him, voice quiet. Your father fought for a country, you and I fought for what came after. He smiled, and we won. Later that evening, the sun set behind the pines, casting long shadows through the living room. Emily stood alone for a moment, hand resting against the flag's fabric. Semper Fi, she whispered. She didn't mean it as a promise anymore. She meant it as a truth. Always faithful. Always rebuilding. Because faithfulness wasn't about staying where you were. It was about carrying what mattered into every new chapter, even when it hurt. She turned off the lights, leaving only the glow of the flag in the twilight. And as the quiet settled around her, not empty, but full of memory, she realized something that felt like the final line of a long, hard poem. Legacy isn't what we leave behind. It's what we continue to hold. The house no longer felt empty. It breathed again, slow, calm, sure. Morning light fell across the flag on the wall, the same flag that had once lived folded for 15 silent years. Now it hung open, alive, part of the home instead of a monument to loss. Emily stood in the doorway, coffee in hand, watching dust motes drift like tiny memories through the air. The house smelled like paint and pine, and faint traces of rain from the night before. Evan was already gone for work, teaching art at the community center full-time now. But his presence lingered everywhere. Sketches on the counter, muddy shoes by the door, a note on the fridge that said, back by 6, don't eat my pie. She smiled. The handwriting was so much like Daniel's it almost hurt. That day she stopped by the base. She'd been invited to speak at the Veterans Family Seminar, not as a widow this time, but as a counselor, someone who'd learned the language of survival and grace. When she stepped to the podium, the room went quiet. Rows of new faces stared up at her, young wives, husbands, parents, all trying to look brave. She didn't bring notes, just the truth. When I got the knock on my door, she began softly, I thought my life ended. But grief, it's a strange kind of teacher. It shows you who you were never meant to be and then gives you a chance to rebuild. She paused, letting the silence breathe. I was angry for years. At him, at God, at myself. Then one day, a boy showed up who carried the same eyes I thought I'd never see again, and everything I thought I'd buried came back not to haunt me but to heal me. Her voice trembled, but she kept going. If you're here hurting, wondering if you'll ever stop feeling broken, you will. But not by forgetting, by building, by showing up, by loving again. When she finished, the room didn't clap. It didn't have to. One young woman stood and whispered, "Thank you." And that was enough. As she walked out, an older veteran stopped her in the hallway. "You're Daniel Carter's wife, aren't you?" She smiled faintly. I guess I still am in some way. He nodded. He talked about you once, said you were tougher than boot camp. She laughed softly. That sounds like him. Outside, she stood for a moment under the open sky, feeling the wind move across her face. It didn't sting anymore. It carried warmth. That evening, Evan came home with a paint-smeared hoodie and a grin. "Big day at the center," he said. "The kids finished their new mural." "What's it about this time?" He smiled. "Home." He grabbed her hand. "Come see." They drove across town to the community center's courtyard, the same wall where years ago she'd watched him paint his first mural as a boy. Now it was different, bigger, fuller. The mural showed three figures: a Marine, a woman holding a flag, and a young man painting light across the sky. Above them in wide brushstrokes, "Always faithful." Below that in small letters, "For those who rebuild after loss." Emily's throat tightened. "You painted this." "The kids did," he said softly. "I just helped them believe they could." She stepped closer, fingers brushing the rough brick. It wasn't perfect, colors bled into each other, edges blurred, but that made it real. "Alive." Evan watched her quietly. "You okay?" She nodded. "Better than okay." For a moment they stood there, mother and son, survivor and legacy, staring at a wall that had once been blank but now held everything that mattered. Later that night, back home, she sat on the porch with a blanket and an old photo album. She hadn't opened it in years. The pages smelled faintly of cedar and memory. Daniel in uniform, smiling like he didn't know what destiny had waiting for him. Their wedding day, his deployment, letters, then the long space between pages where no photos existed, just years of silence. Then came new photos, her and Evan. Baseball games, art shows, the first mural, the medal ceremony, the Raleigh exhibit. She stopped on one picture, the two of them standing in front of the unfolded flag, sunlight streaming behind. Her thumb traced the edges of the frame. "Look at us," she whispered. "We made it." She leaned back, eyes closing as night sounds filled the air, crickets, wind, the faint rustle of the trees. And somewhere in that quiet, she could almost feel Daniel again. Not in grief but in presence. Not as absent but as peace. "You did good, Em." She smiled. "We did better than good." The next morning, Evan left early again. But this time, he didn't go to teach. He went to enlist for a humanitarian tour overseas. A short one, just 6 weeks, helping rebuild storm shelters in a coastal region. He told her the night before, quietly, almost afraid, "I want to keep doing what we started." She didn't try to stop him. She just hugged him tighter than usual, whispering, "Come home proud, not just safe." Now, watching his car disappear down the road, she didn't feel fear. She felt pride so deep it hurt. Days passed, then weeks. Letters came again, not as often but enough. "Mom, you were right. Love and duty don't end when people do. They just find new hands." She pinned that letter to the fridge beside his note about the pie. One afternoon, she received a small package. Inside was a seashell, smoothed by salt and time. On it he'd written in tiny letters, "Legacy lives where we build, not where we break." She placed it beside Daniel's dog tags on the mantle. 6 weeks later, he came home again. Taller somehow, eyes softer. He carried stories she didn't need to hear to understand. Stories written in the calmness of his voice and the lightness in his steps. That night they sat at the kitchen table eating the pie he once told her not to touch. "Still terrible at baking," she teased. He grinned. "Still better than your pancakes." They laughed until the house echoed. And in that laughter, something beautiful happened. Time folded in on itself. The past and present met quietly in the middle, shaking hands. Years rolled on. The seasons turned with less urgency. The house aged but never wore down, much like her. Evan's art gained recognition, exhibitions, articles, interviews. But he never left the town for long. He said every canvas he painted started with the same image: home. Sometimes he'd visit the mural at the community center with his students. They repaint it every few years, keeping the colors fresh, the message alive. One day a little girl asked him, "Who's the lady in the painting?" He smiled. "My mom, the strongest Marine who never wore the uniform." As for Emily, she kept working at the base, mentoring new widows, young parents, anyone who needed a steady hand. Her name became known quietly, not in headlines, but in gratitude whispered through hallways. "Talk to Mrs. Carter," people said. "She understands." She never told them the whole story. She didn't need to. Some stories aren't meant to be told in full. They're meant to be lived in the echo of others who survive after you. Years later, on a warm autumn evening, Emily sat on the same porch where it all began. The sky burned gold and orange, the wind carrying the scent of pine and faint salt from the distant coast. Evan sat beside her, now a man in his 30s. His hair was longer, his smile the same. He'd brought his daughter, her granddaughter, a little girl with Daniel's eyes and her stubborn chin. The child tugged on her sleeve. "Grandma, Daddy says you were a hero." Emily laughed softly. "He's exaggerating." The girl tilted her head. "Did you fight in a war?" "Sort of," Emily said gently, "but not with guns, with faith." "Did you win?" She smiled, eyes soft. "I did, because I never stopped fighting." The little girl nodded seriously. "Daddy said you were always faithful." Emily looked at Evan, and he smiled, that same warm, knowing smile that held everything they'd survived. "Always," she said softly. "That's our family rule." When night fell, the porch light flickered on same bulb, same glow. Evan tucked his daughter into the car and kissed Emily's forehead. "You okay here?" She smiled. "I always am." He paused, hand on her shoulder. "You made all this possible, you know." She looked out at the stars. "No, we did." After they left, she sat for a long while watching the flag ripple in the night breeze through the window. Then she stood, walked inside and turned off the lamp. The house fell into darkness, but not silence. Because some homes, like some hearts, keep humming even after the lights go out. And when dawn broke, soft, golden, eternal, it poured through the blinds just as it always had. But this time, it didn't fall on a folded flag or an empty table. It fell on a framed photo of three people, Daniel, Emily, and Evan, smiling in different moments, different years, stitched together on one wall. The caption below it read, in Evan's careful handwriting, "Semper Fi, always faithful." And beneath that, a smaller line, one Emily had written herself. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. The sunlight touched those words like a benediction. And for one quiet, perfect moment, the house that had carried every kind of silence, grief, hope, faith, love simply breathed. Alive, whole, forever faithful.